Hello everyone, this will be our lecture over Jonathan Swift and his essay A Modest Proposal. Let's go ahead and give some background about Jonathan Swift. He is actually an Anglo-Irish writer, although he lived much of his life in Ireland. He did spend some time in England as well, and his parents were English, but he was born in Dublin. So he's both English and Irish. Although for our interests, it might be more to our benefit to focus on his Irish background because the Modest Proposal is basically drawing attention to the condition of Ireland while he's living when he's writing the essay in 1729. Okay, so yeah, born to English parents in Dublin. Got through his uncle. He got an education and joined the church as a clergyman. So, in fact, he was a huge supporter of the Anglican Church. So similar like John Donne, who went into the Anglican Church and wrote sermons, things like that. He became a member, but by virtue of being part of the Anglican Church, he became hostile to groups that he saw outside the church, like deists, freethinkers, Roman Catholics, nonconformists, or Whig politicians. In fact, he actually started out writing for the Whig causes, but in 1710 he saw the Whig Party as indifferent to things he cared about, like the Anglican Church, and the Tories appeared much more sympathetic, and so he became a Tory, started writing for the Examiner, which was a Tory newspaper during that time, and writes about a lot of Tory causes. But he was also considered, in some ways, a defender of liberty in Ireland. In fact, he wrote a lot of pamphlets under the pseudonym Drapier, which basically, uh, were letters, trying to give advice about how Ireland should be treated, what things could be done to relieve Ireland, because Ireland's never gotten a good deal. I think I mentioned when we talked about the Commonwealth and the Interregnum that Oliver Cromwell is fairly notorious for going into Scotland and Ireland and massacring people because, well, especially Ireland, because they have a, as Swift points out in his essay, they are a much more Catholic nation, and they have historically been Catholic, as opposed to the Protestantism that England was trying to force on them. Because I believe it's around 1707 that we have the Act of Union. So now we're not just talking, when we're talking about British literature, we're not just talking about England, as we've mainly focused on England this semester. Now we're definitely getting into the British aspect, because now, as of 1707, they're Great Britain. The kingdoms are unified, so it includes Scotland, England, and and Ireland as part of Great Britain. So Great Britain and England are not the same. It represents that unification. Okay. So yeah, he's considered an Irish national hero. He had many Tory friends during that time, such as writers such as Alexander Pope, Joseph Edison, Joseph Addison, among others. Um, so yeah, and he was a very political writer, and sometimes he's kind of considered somewhat of a misanthrope, especially if you ever read like the things out of Gulliver's Travels, which is another thing that he's known for. Such as the Land of the Winebs, and in fact, he says that individuals he can stand, but men in general is something that he is not very fond of. Where he discriminates between men of reason and men capable of reason, and kind of rails against those who he sees as not following reason. So let's turn to A Modest Proposal. As it says, the full title is A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People in Ireland from Being a Burden to Their Parents or Country and from Making them Beneficial to the Public. So we're in an age, sometimes referred to as the Enlightenment. We're in the 18th century now, where there is more optimism about human nature developing, as far as that humans can be improved, and that they can, and that people can, there, which led to a flourish of philanthropy. And well, according to someone like Jonathan Swift, if you read the introduction, it says that he was more of the ancient belief that humankind is more corrupted, and he put more emphasis on recognizing our limitations and then trying to move forward. And he felt like too many people um, winged it, I guess you could say, like, or played solutions of social ills fast and loose, and he was in great opposition to that. And so this essay here, A Modest Proposal, is basically kind of a parody of that philanthropic optimism of the 18th century. In fact, the footnote even says that these people were forerunners, the benevolent humanitarian who were forerunners of like the modern day social worker and sociologist. In some ways, this is a parody of that because he replicates that kind of tone very well. In fact, the first couple paragraphs are very serious. In fact, they seem, like something you would expect from an essay that's going to seriously address a social ill without any humor or satire whatsoever. Because A Modest Proposal is a satire. It's a Juvenalian satire, which means it's a harsh, biting, caustic, one that is meant to be on the offensive and attacking others. I think if I took an inventory, I believe uh, Juvenalian satire is usually held in opposition to Horatian satire, which is more uh, like a like a roast, for instance, like the roast that they do on Comedy Central. That's kind of Horatian. It's meant just to poke fun. It's not meant to be, damning. Juvenalian is usually supposed to be damning, like to prompt about serious change, whereas Horatian is more lighthearted and more laid back. And I don't know, if I had to take an inventory of satires, I would put my money on there being more Juvenalian satires written than Horatian, because there's a lot of satires out there that, in satire, basically, to break it down, is to basically deride in a humorous manner something that needs serious attention, like to make fun of vice in a way that exposes it as ludicrous and absurd and stupid, to kind of sum it up in layman's terms. So, A Modest Proposal, I think you realize very quick that this is an understatement. To call it modest is a little ironic because, well, as we see, we started out talking about mothers not being able to work for honest livelihood, can't feed their children. They're scrounging to have they're begging for sustenance for their children, which might make them support James II, James Francis Edward Stuart's claim, who is the son of James II, who's considered a pretender at this point. So yeah, he's basically trying to point out a real problem. There's a problem of poverty and a lack of work in Ireland, and he gives a lot of attention to that for all these paragraphs, and that there's a real problem. And he says he has a solution. Let's see. In fact, he takes an inventory about where he thinks the population is and also an assessment of the situation. And then he gets to the thesis of his proposal, and that's towards the bottom of 2634. And so at this point, he's kind of sucked us in with all this information and statistics. Like he breaks down, like he divides and subtracts, the number of the population, showing that he has a rational grasp on, what the state of Ireland is. So he gives us an interesting assessment about, well, he talks about how women are in such dire straits that they're forced to murder their bastard children and sacrifice their babes. And so he sucks us in with this kind of cool overview of Ireland, and then he brings out a very ludicrous thesis, which might be, in some ways might be missed, with the exception of that it's really absurd that he has been assured by a very knowing American, bottom of 2634, of my acquaintance in London, that a young, healthy child well nursed is at a year old most delicious, nourishing, wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. And I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout. And he very meticulously develops this proposal on an absurd basis that we can sell children, infants, as food, so you can turn them into a commodity. And this, basically this metaphor is sustained throughout the proposal that England, well, it's to mock England as already devouring the adults, well, already devouring the nation of Ireland, that they might as well eat the children too. Because, well, as I said, Ireland's not treated very well, based on a lot of English prejudices. In fact, a lot of the lords that were given, that have lordships and tenants in Ireland were absentee, and what that means is that they were living in England and trying to rule, and oversee their lands from England. Doesn't necessarily work that way. Case in point, America. You can't, it's like it's very lackluster and being attuned to the affairs in that locality. And so Swift, who is living in Ireland, gives some details about how, goes into detail about how, a child will make two dishes and entertainment for friends. It also, and that's telling. He starts out with this image of women, mothers begging for sustenance for their children, and then he contrasts that with the luxurious lifestyle that these babes will serve, and that they can, provide dishes for dinner parties for the luxuriant rich English. So it's also so there are points where he does things like that that draw a distinction between the um, inequity between England and Ireland. One's in a dire situation, and one is getting fat off it. Um, and it's a win-win for everybody. Is basically his argument. That he says infants' flesh will be in season throughout the year. Women will start caring more about their children because there will be some profit to be had off of it, so they'll invest more in taking care of their children. Also, and you don't have to waste any of the baby because you can take the you with the skin you can make admirable gloves for ladies. They can be used for fashion, and summer boots for fine gentlemen. So there is a more luxury, besides a very tasty meat. You can you know apply it to fashion use as well. Let's see. Yeah, it's absurd, but it's to bitingly make a point that this would appeal to, well, his audience really is mostly the English. It sounds like, Irish is there too, but it's mostly the English, and so it's to make fun of them. In fact, he follows this in a very strict rhetorical fashion. I mean, he presents a counter argument about, or that basically proposes an alternative as far as like older boys who are already not finding work as well, older boys and girls. Um, and it's said that the older boys, that their meat is like is too lean and tough to be enjoyed, and that girls, well, that's wasting possible breeders that you could have, and so it kind of it's very dehumanizing. In fact, let's see, where was it? They liken it to basically how you would treat livestock at one point. And so, in fact, he actually gives a overall list of his reasons of where you can the babes will bring income in for Irish, and so they already are in great debt, and they can buy possessions, and then they can be repossessed to pay off their debts. So you can exploit them more. Um, for so England can exploit them more. It's a mock kind of appeal, like, look, this will be good for you because this is how you do things already. Um, let's see. Uh, oh wait, men would become as fond of their wives. Yeah, on page 2637 it says men would become as fond of their wives during their time of pregnancy as they now are now their mares and fowl, their cows and calves. Because really, it sounds like he's basically saying like they would have more of a reason to care about their progeny because there would be actual monetary worth, and that seems to be something that Ireland is really struggling with. In fact, on 2638, that is where the real remedies are, and he presents them as if they're absurd ideas, but these are probably the more logical ones. But he's saying that the way England reacts to his proposition, and these are things that he's presented in pamphlets before, the way England reacts to them, they kind of discount the ideas. And so he says people might not be agree with my proposal to eat children, but he says this I freely own, and if it was indeed one, like towards the bottom of 2637, um, this I freely own, and it was indeed one principal design in offering it to the world. I desire the reader will observe. Let's go to the next page. That I calculate my remedy for this one individual kingdom of Ireland, and for no other that was ever is, or I think ever upon can be upon the other. Therefore, let no man talk to me of other expedients, of taxing our absentees at 5 shillings a pound, of using neither clothes nor household furniture except what is our own growth and manufacture, of utterly rejecting the materials and instruments that promote foreign luxury. So he's kind of tackling materialism, importing good, finery from foreign countries like France and, in other, or Spain or Italy, because that's what the English would do. They would import a lot of fashionable materialistic goods, which were not cheap. Of learning to love our country in the want of which we differ from even Laplanders and the inhabitants of Topinambu, of quitting our animosities and factions, nor acting any longer like the Jews who were murdering one another at the very moment their city was taken, of being a little cautious not to sell our country and conscience for nothing, of teaching landlords to have at least one degree of mercy toward their tenants. And so he's saying, don't speak to me about these things because they're not plausible. Except these are the best actual um, remedies compared to this idea of eating babies, because eating babies does seem like a good idea, but from a humanistic stance it seems really illogical. It seems monstrous. Really. And it seems like a very dire strait to be in. I think it kind of underscores what he thinks, how he perceives the situation in Ireland as being dire, because he says that going to such great lengths is one of the only solutions he can come up with to, try to make sure that Ireland is healthy. Oh, he also says it will reduce the number, the papist population. So the Catholic population would be reduced, since Ireland mostly housed a lot of Catholics. And he even tries to, establish his own credibility, because he says in this proposal, I have no stake. My son is, my youngest is 9 years old, well past the age of being succulent enough to be, killed off and sold for food. And his wife is past childbearing, so he has no hope to get any funds from having children. So this would reduce abortion, although paradoxically it would kind of encourage a kind of slaughter of babies anyways, just for a more useful purpose of digestion. So again, a lot of my students in the past have been turned off by this essay because they don't realize right away that because it's so well put together that this is satire, that he's not seriously suggesting that we eat babies. He's doing it as a way to satirize and attack the English, who are, as it says on page 2635, I grant this food will be somewhat dear and therefore very proper for landlords who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. So it's sarcasm, basically. He doesn't believe this at all. Yeah, in fact, he appeals to things that he sees as paling to comparison. Like there's a lot of economic language as far as increasing revenues, and also making prudent investments. He even says that no gentleman would repine to give 10 shillings to the carcass of a good fat child, because what you get in return is exponential, and Ireland gets a working wage. So yeah, so again, it's during this time it's attacking England for some of the ways that they treat Ireland. They didn't treat Ireland good, especially because of because they saw them as Catholic. All right. If you have any questions about Moss proposal, please let me know.